What the actual hell? You ever wake up and think, maybe today's the day the universe just gives me a break, only to step outside Boxer's Coffee 6 in the damn morning and find your whole front yard looks like a shipping depot? I'm not kidding. 16 mailbox towers, think fridges with locks lined up in neat little military rows where my azaleas used to be. Concrete still wet, stinking up the air. And guess what's blocking my driveway? That's right. A wall of steel mailboxes and the world's most obnoxious HOA president grinning at me with her Stepford wife smile. "Isn't it great community mail upgrade?" she chirps. "Yeah, great, Vivian. You just turned my lawn into a post-apocalyptic UPS hub without so much as a heads up. I could see my blood pressure climbing right there, coffee about to leave my fist like a fastball. I knew right then that this wasn't a mistake. This was war." Now you might be thinking, why not just walk away? Let the mailbox towers stand and move on. But let me tell you, I've got Navy in my blood, 20 years of fixing helicopters and fighting chaos on a moving ocean. After the world's messiest divorce, I was just trying to start over somewhere quiet. Pinewood Springs seemed like the kind of place where you wave at your neighbors and mean it. But 3 months in, and the only thing waving was Vivian, and her wave was a warning. She showed up 3 days after I moved in, white Lexus, sparkling hair and nails like she'd never met a weed or a wrench. "Welcome to Pinewood Springs, clipboard in hand. We maintain very high standards here." And it wasn't even subtle the way her eyes scanned my calloused hands, the oil stains on my jeans, like I was a problem to solve. You ever meet someone who runs on power and perfume? That's Vivian Ashworth. Married to Richard, big bank guy, but she ran this place like a tiny kingdom. The neighborhood used to be teachers and nurses and people who just wanted a patch of grass. But when the tech folks started moving in, property values shot up and suddenly everyone was terrified of lowering the standards. And Vivian, she became the standard. She became, cross her and you get buried in violations. Ask Eddie next door. Retired electrician, Polish accent thick as concrete. He'd been documenting Vivian's tactics for years. Whispered to me over the fence about how she'd chased out the Hendersons, a nice family, but, wrong skin color for Vivian's taste. Violation after violation until they gave up and sold at a loss. My first run-in. Painted my mailbox navy blue, a little tribute to the Navy, looked sharp against the white post. 3 days later, boom, a fine. Unapproved mailbox modification. $150 plus $50 for every day I didn't comply. I actually read the HOA rules, imagine that. Earth tone variations appropriate to neighborhood aesthetic. Blues and earth tone, if you've ever seen the ocean, right? So I show up at her door with my documentation Home Depot color chart in hand. Her answer, military colors send the wrong message in a family neighborhood, Jake. Standing there surrounded by crystal figurines and air that smelled like money and bleach, I realized it was never about paint. It was about keeping the wrong kind of people in their place. So I'm sitting in my garage drinking cheap beer, listening to leaf blowers and highway noise, thinking this was supposed to be my sanctuary. The next morning, city permits go up, community mailbox relocation project installation right at my address. Vivian had just escalated. See, when you make your living fixing things, you get curious about how stuff is supposed to work. I went down to the county courthouse, dug through records, felt like some kind of suburban spy. Her survey said there was an easement running 12 feet into my yard. Sounded official, except it was fake. Her brother-in-law, a disgraced surveyor, had signed off. But the real survey from the 90s, no easement. My property plain as day. I laid it all out on Eddie's kitchen table. He just shook his head. She is like snake in tall grass, always watching, always planning. He then handed me his own folder thick with years of meeting minutes and violations, and there it was, my address, black and white, targeted for community standards intervention before I even bought the house. Reason: non-conforming owner demographic projected to negatively impact surrounding property values. Translation: blue-collar Navy vet, not welcome. So the mailbox stunt. Just phase 1. She wanted me gone, bankrupt from legal fees or so, beaten down by violations I'd sell and disappear. But she made one mistake: she thought I wouldn't fight back. I found her at Whole Foods loading up her Lexus. 3 board members flanking her like bodyguards. I walked right up, didn't matter who was watching. "Vivian, I know about the forged survey, the targeting, the whole campaign." For 2 seconds she lost that mask, real fear, then back to smiling. "I have no idea what you mean, Jake," but she was rattled. And in this kind of war, that's the first crack in the wall. The next morning, code enforcement was at my door, badges, clipboards, violations for running an unlicensed business, noise, fire safety, you name it. Each one carried a $200 fine. She'd called in favors all over City Hall, but that only made me dig in deeper. Within days, the neighborhood was plastered with glossy flyers, concerned about your property investment. The posts in the homeowners group started implying some dangerous element was threatening the community. Suddenly, people I'd waved to started crossing the street when they saw me. But that's when Eddie stepped up. Over bitter coffee in his garage packed with 30 years of tools and memories, he laid out Vivian's whole playbook. She'd run this scam before start with petty complaints, escalate with legal pressure, isolate the target until they crack. Photos, legal letters, timelines. She was running the same con on me, just with new tricks. The final straw. Concrete trucks showed up at dawn, rumbling like an invading army. 16 mailbox towers cemented right into my garden. Martinez, the postal supervisor, shook his head. Makes no sense. Should have put these at the entrance, not here. But your HOA paid a $15,000 expedite fee to put them right on your lawn. 15 grand for a job that should have cost 3. Everyone was paying for Vivian's personal vendetta. But here's the twist, her perfect revenge plan was also perfectly illegal. Blocked driveways, sightlines, emergency vehicles couldn't get through. 3 fender benders in a week. Mrs. Rosley's ambulance got stuck. Vivian tried to cover it up with an emergency HOA meeting, but she broke every rule, no notice, no quorum, and then tried to slap a $500 legal defense assessment on every homeowner to cover her tracks. But we had an ace. Maria, the night nurse who'd lived here for years, snuck into that meeting and recorded everything. Vivian on tape. Sometimes you have to make examples of people who don't understand how things work. That's not just a power trip, that's evidence. Things escalated fast. Friday night, my tires got slashed. Next day, garage door glued shut. Then my garden hose accidentally got cut, flooding my basement. I couldn't prove it, but I didn't need to. It was a message back down or she'd ruin me. Standing in a foot of water, ruined tools at my feet, I hit a turning point. I'd been on defense too long. 20 years in the Navy taught me you don't win by retreating. You win by knowing the rules better than your enemy and by hitting back where it hurts. So I started gathering everything. I went to the state capitol, sat with a board clerk, and handed over a pile of evidence, fake surveys, meeting minutes, the audio of Vivian basically admitting harassment. Maria's recording turned it from petty neighborhood drama to a criminal case. Vivian's next move tried to declare my property a community nuisance and force a sale. But her emergency meeting didn't have a quorum. And the one guy she didn't expect, Tom Bradley, retired teacher, usually silent, stood up and called her out. Meeting adjourned. Vivian's hands actually shook as she packed up her papers. But Eddie, God bless him, showed up at my door late that night with more news. That white sedan been parked on Maple Street 3 weeks. His nephew at DMV found it registered to Ashworth Properties. Vivian had hired her own nephew to spy on me. Too bad he didn't have a PI license. One more illegal move for our case file. The real tipping point. The whole neighborhood turned. Turns out when you make everyone's life hell just to get at one guy, people notice. Eddie knocked on doors, ran his own little poll. 2/3 of residents wanted the mailboxes gone. Mail delays, accidents, 5 in 2 weeks. Vivian had overplayed her hand. Her final shot served me with a restraining order, accused me of threatening her in the parking lot. Complete fiction. But I realized something sitting in my truck, legal papers in hand, sun beating down. In these wars, the system favors whoever has more time and money. But that's the thing about people like Vivian, they never expect the underdog to know the fine print. While she was gloating, I was in my garage figuring out exactly how those mailboxes had been installed. Quickset concrete, not even deep. No rebar. The whole thing was built for speed, not permanence. Maria came by with more news. She and her hospital friends had dug into HOA finances and found a rabbit hole of fake repair bills, embezzlement, and double dipping on taxes. Over 100 grand missing. Then jackpot. Maria found a clause in the original subdivision covenant, section 12C, allowing any homeowner to relocate hazardous community infrastructure that posed a safety risk. And Eddie discovered Vivian's own house sat outside HOA territory. That meant, by the book, the only place for those mailboxes once removed was her own driveway. Thursday night, storm clouds rolling in, we moved. Eddie's son-in-law brought his crane truck. Maria had waterproof docks. Tom lined up Channel 7 for morning coverage. Mike from the construction company brought magnetic municipal emergency services signs. We looked like a city crew. Thunder masked the saws, rain hid the evidence, and by 3 a.m., all 16 mailbox towers stood proudly, perfectly arranged, blocking Vivian's Lexus in her garage. I left a laminated notice emergency relocation for safety per municipal code right on top. Eddie, grinning, handed me a box we'd found under the last cluster master keys and logs showing Vivian had been tampering with resident mail. That's federal. Game over. By sunrise, news vans and cops were there. Vivian stormed out in her robe and slippers, shrieking, "Who did this to my property?" I stepped forward, coffee in hand. "Morning, Vivian. Those are the community mailboxes you installed illegally on my property. I relocated them for everyone's safety. Municipal Code 847C. Cops checked my paperwork. Channel 7 caught every word. Then Eddie handed over the evidence box. Officer Martinez's face changed from bored to serious. "Ma'am, I need to ask you about federal mail tampering and financial irregularities." The crowd cheered like it was July 4th. Neighbors started handing out flyers with everything Maria and Tom had documented: fraud, discrimination, harassment. People who'd been quiet for years finally found their voices. The best part, postal supervisor showed up, nodded at the installation, and said, "Much better location. Meets all safety requirements. We'll make this permanent." Vivian went pale as a ghost. By that afternoon, state investigators were there with criminal referrals. Vivian was escorted away, still in her bathrobe neighborhood, watching news cameras rolling. You ever see justice in action? It's not always pretty, but it is satisfying as hell. 6 months later. Pinewood Springs is a different place. Vivian pled guilty: embezzlement, mail fraud, breach of duty, paid restitution, lost her house, lost her little fiefdom. The emergency election saw Eddie become president. Maria's the treasurer. Tom's handling communications. Monthly reports go out, legal aid for anyone harassed by an HOA. Community barbecues, new playgrounds, people waving again. My navy blue mailbox is still out front now, one of dozens of colors. Even Vivian's old loyalists painted theirs after seeing how much money she'd stolen. The new scholarship fund has already helped local veterans go back to school. My handyman business is thriving. Turns out beating a corrupt HOA is great advertising. But you know what matters most? People help each other again. Kids play basketball at dusk. Neighbors wave when I mow. Pinewood Springs is finally the place I thought I was moving to. And those mailboxes still sitting in Vivian's old driveway. Local tour buses sometimes stop to take pictures, monuments to what happens when regular people stand up and say enough. Law schools use our story in case studies. Every time someone calls and asks how to fight their own HOA war, I just laugh and say, "Let me tell you about the night the mailboxes moved." So here's my question for you. How many of you have actually read your HOA bylaws start to finish? I'm betting not many. That's what people like Vivian count on. If my story made you smile, or maybe just a little less alone in your own fight, stick around. Share your story. Because trust me, there are a lot more bullies out there, but there are also a lot more folks who know how to push back.